Knox County 8th graders. My name is Dean Burris, and I work for Knox County Social Studies Department. And I'm going to be looking with you today at the lives of soldiers during the American Civil War. So before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Miss Karen Peterman, who teaches 8th grade at West Valley Middle School here in Knox County. She's the one that came up with this lesson that we're going to be looking through, and she did an amazing job with that. And so you have studied the Civil War a little bit up to this point, looking at the outbreak of the war and certain battles that were fought. So today we're going to be looking at what it might have been like to be a soldier during the Civil War in either the Confederate or the Union Army. So you should have a packet of information, and it should have listed in there the resources that we're going to be using, and so that you can follow along with this video. As we get started also, if you have trouble with this video or if you find the video is hard to understand, there's a few different things that you can do. You can turn on closed captions if you have those available. You can adjust the playback speed. You can pause the video and watch shorter clips or rewatch certain clips. And then you can ask someone at home to watch the video with you and talk and discuss as you go along. So, looking at your screen here, you see two photographs of Civil War soldiers. The one on the left is a Confederate soldier, and the one on the right is a Union soldier. So what comes to mind when you think about what it might have been like to be a soldier during the Civil War on either side? Do you think it would have been hard? Do you think it would have been easy? Do you think it would have been fun? What do you think your experiences might have been like had you been a soldier during the war? And do you think it would have been different if you had served in the Union Army or the Confederate Army? So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at today. So before we get on into the intricacies of serving in the war, let's take a look really quickly at how armies are structured and commanded. So in your study of the Civil War, you've probably seen references to different armies, like the Army of Northern Virginia or the Army of the Potomac in the Union. And generally, Confederate and Union armies are organized the same. So they're made up of, if you look at the bottom of that left-hand triangle, the red triangle, you can see it starts with companies, and then you move on up all the way up to an army. And an army is a huge unit. So you're talking about thousands and thousands of soldiers, sometimes hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And then on the right-hand side, that inverse triangle shows you the command structure. So you're obviously going to have a lot more privates in the Army, and then as you move on up to the general, who's the leader of the Army. So that's like a major general like Robert E. Lee or Ulysses S. Grant. So when you think about the average soldier on either side, unfortunately the Confederacy did not really keep great records of their soldiers, so we don't have a good indication of the demographics of their army, but we do have for the Union Army. So if you look at this graph, you can see that most Union soldiers were somewhere around their mid-20s. You have a small percentage, about 10%, that are under the age of 16, and then you have most that are somewhere over the age of 23. You were supposed to be 18 in order to serve in the Army, but you can see here if 10% of the soldiers, according to this graph, were under 16 years old, then a lot of people got in that weren't 18. And it's not like everybody carried around a driver's license like they do today so that you could prove your age. You just sort of trusted people. So people lied about their age all the time. But you can see that most soldiers are going to be on the younger end of the spectrum. Most average soldiers are going to be white. They're going to be native born. That means they're born here in the United States. They're not immigrants. They're probably going to be farmers, probably going to be Protestant instead of Catholic, because that was the majority of the people that lived in the United States at this time. And they're probably going to be single. That's because they're normally younger, somewhere between the age of 18 and 29. And one thing to keep in mind, though, is that as the war goes on, the Confederacy in particular is going to get a lot more desperate for manpower. So they're going to start letting in really, really, really young kids, 12, 13 years old, sometimes younger than that. And then they're going to go all the way to the other end of the age spectrum where they're going to be letting in 40, 50, 60-year-olds, requiring them to serve because they're so desperate for manpower. And then as far as the physical stature of the average soldier, probably going to be somewhere around 5 feet 8 inches tall and about 143 pounds. So usually on the slider side, you're not talking about giant guys that are in these armies, just a normal, average, everyday kind of guy. So think about why they might have fought in the war. So if you were serving in the Union Army at that time, why would you have went and fought in the war if you had volunteered or maybe you got drafted? Well, part of it is probably going to be for patriotism. You have a love for your country and you want to protect your country. So that's going to be a big reason why you're going to fight. You may have pride in the particular state you're from. So if you're from Pennsylvania or from Maine, you might want to show off your state's prowess. And so you go and tell everybody you're from Maine and you're there to represent your state. You may be bored at home. Remember, most of these guys are farmers, and let's face it, farming is not very exciting. So you might be interested in the adventure that's going to come from fighting in a war. And then it may be that you just need the pay because you might be poor, and in order to get a steady paycheck, you go serve in the army and you get that money. So there's a variety of reasons why people went and volunteered or got drafted and served in the army. That was mainly for the white soldiers. For the African American men that are able to enlist after the Emancipation Proclamation, their reasoning is obviously going to be a little bit different. And that's because we know that the war ends up being fought to free slaves in the Confederacy. And so as African Americans are able to enlist and serve in the army, their cause for fighting is different. They're fighting to free their brothers and sisters that are still in bondage in the South. And so the war is going to be a lot more personal for them and a lot more meaningful for them when it comes to freeing those slaves. So in talking about the service of African American soldiers, let's focus for a second on probably what is the most well-known African American unit in the Civil War, and that's the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. So the 54th was originally formed in Boston and started with about 1,000 African American men. It was led by a young man named Robert Gould Shaw, and was, after being formed, was sent to Charleston, South Carolina. So on July 18th, 1863, this unit was tasked with taking Fort Wagner, which was a fort outside Charleston. And it was heavily fortified by Confederates. And they ended up fighting really, really difficult combat, hand-to-hand fighting, and the 54th Regiment suffered a large number of casualties. They ended up losing the battle, but they fought really bravely. Their commander was even killed in the battle, and the honor and dignity that they showed in fighting was really an inspiration to other white soldiers at the time. And even abolitionist Frederick Douglass, he had 2 sons that enlisted and served in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And there's actually a really good quote by Frederick Douglass that I'll read you that sort of puts you in the mind frame for the bravery and the reasons why African Americans wanted to fight in the war. So Frederick Douglass said, quote, "Once let the black man get up on his person the brass letters U.S., let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth or under earth which can deny that he has earned the right of citizenship in the United States." So that gives you a good indication of the reasoning for African American involvement in the Civil War once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln. So that's the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. But here in Tennessee, we actually have another regiment that we'll focus on that is a little bit more relevant to us, and that's the 13th U.S. Colored Troops out of Nashville. So that was a Union Army unit as well. When they were first put together in Nashville, they totaled nearly 20,000 men, which is a huge number for a unit, and made up mostly of former slaves. They're known for their fighting in the Battle of Nashville, which was between December 15th and 16th in 1863. They lost nearly 40% of their unit, but they fought bravely, and they helped the Union win that Battle of Nashville, and it ensured that Nashville would remain in Union hands for the rest of the war. So here in Tennessee, we remember the 13th U.S. Colored Troops for their bravery in the fighting at the Battle of Nashville. So in thinking about the experience of African-American men serving in the war specifically, we're going to look at a primary source document that you have in your packet. So it's the one that looks like an old broadside that might have been hung up on a bulletin board somewhere, and across the top it says "to colored men." So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this primary source document and then answer these questions that you have in your packet that are on the screen here. So before we look at the document, though, let's read over the questions so that we know what we need to be looking for. So the first question is, who do you think is the intended audience for the poster? That one should be pretty easy to answer. Number 2, what does the government hope the audience will do? Number 3, what references to pay do you find in this document? Number 4, what references to treatment of prisoners of war do you find in this document? Number 5, what evidence of discrimination during the Civil War do you find in this document? Number 6, what evidence of government efforts to improve conditions for Black soldiers do you find in this document? And number 7, what purposes of the government is or are served by this document? So once you've had a chance to read over that document and study it, then answer those 7 questions, and then you can continue the video once you've done that. So now let's take a look at, again, getting back to what it might have been like to serve in the Army on either side and what your experiences might have been like. So think about what, if you had been a soldier, what you might have worn on either side. So if you're looking on your screen here, the uniform on the right-hand side is going to be for a Union soldier, and on the left-hand side is going to be for a Confederate soldier. If you served in the Union Army, your odds are you were going to have a matching uniform just like everybody else. And it would have been okay quality. And if something happened to it, you could have probably pretty readily got it replaced. But in the Confederate Army, they're not as well supplied. So you might be wearing something from home. It might be dyed using homemade stuff. And you may not even have a uniform at all. You might just be wearing everyday clothes. So your experiences are going to vary differently between if you're a Union soldier or a Confederate soldier. Also, what you carry with you as you're marching here and there is going to be mostly the same, but again, you're better supplied in the Union Army than you are in the Confederate Army. So you can see some of the things that you're most likely going to have. Obviously, you're going to have your musket. You're going to have a canteen, a haversack, which is number 3. That's where you keep your bullets and things. You might have a shaving kit of some kind. That's number 5. Your blanket or your knapsack. It's going to be number 7. You might have some money, number 12. So all these things are things that you're going to need to take with you as you're marching from camp to camp or marching in the battle. So think about what you might have ate if you had been a soldier. Do you think you might have ate really well? Probably not, especially, again, if you're in the Confederate Army. By the end of the war, if you're in the Confederate Army, you're pretty much close to starvation. you're going to be much better supplied in the Union Army. But both sides are going to be eating pretty much the same stuff. So you're talking about salt pork or bacon, soft bread or flour, cornmeal of some kind, and almost definitely hardtack. And hardtack is a really, really, really hard pressed cracker that can be kept for a really long time, but it's not very good and doesn't have very much flavor. And it can be as hard as a rock. You're probably going to have some beans or maybe some rice, hopefully some coffee of some time or tea. And then if you're really lucky, you would have some sugar, vinegar, or molasses. So what do you do when you're not fighting? So we think about these great battles of the war like the Battle of Shiloh or the Battle of Gettysburg, but those battles like that, you weren't fighting all the time. A typical soldier's life is going to be basically a lot of boring camp life, punctuated by a couple of days of the sheer terror of battle. And then you go back to your camp life. So what are you doing when you're sitting in camp all day? Well, if you look at this quote that's from a Union soldier during the war, you're more than likely drilling a lot. And that's like practicing marching, practicing battle tactics, and things like that. So obviously a lot of drilling. If you're not drilling, then you might be playing games. You might be writing letters home, different things to try to pass the time. Because, again, the vast majority of your time is going to be spent in camp with fellow soldiers. So what kind of weapons did Civil War soldiers use? So most of the time it's going to be a musket of some kind. And depending at the beginning of the war, it would have probably been a smooth bore musket, which means the inside of the barrel is smooth, and it would have fired a little round ball. And they're not very accurate. But as the war goes on, most muskets are going to be rifled, which means that it has grooves on the inside of the barrel. And they're going to fire a projectile that's called a mini ball. And you can see that on your screen there on the right-hand side. And as these mini balls are shot from these rifled muskets, it causes the mini ball to spin like a quarterback throwing a football. And it's a lot more accurate. So you're going to get a lot more death and destruction from these mini balls as you would from a smooth bore musket with a little round ball. The other thing with this ammunition, it's kept in those little haversacks that we saw on that other screen. Those haversacks are dirty. They have a lot of dirt and grime in them and a lot of germs. So that's where you keep your ammunition, and germs get on the ammunition, and then it's shot into another soldier, and then those germs get into that soldier who gets wounded. So what do you do if that happens? So remember in the Civil War that most death in the Civil War is not caused from battlefield wounds. It's caused from disease. But a lot of disease comes from those battlefield wounds. And so, for instance, if you get shot during a battle, whatever germs were on that bullet that entered your body, those germs are going to enter your body as well. And that's what's going to cause you to get sick. So the primary way for treating battlefield injuries was for a doctor to remove whatever limb had been injured. So you can see there on your screen, down sort of in the bottom right-hand corner, that saw and that surgical kit. So let's say that I got hit in the arm during a battle. The quickest way to make sure that that didn't get infected and infect the rest of my body would be for that part of my arm to be sawed off and removed from my body. So really gruesome and very painful, but unfortunately a part of Civil War battles and Civil War medicine. So in thinking about that, think about the cost of the Civil War and in lives lost. So you can see in this graphic on your screen the Civil War compared with other major wars that the United States has fought. So you can see on here basically every major war up through the modern day war on terror. So you can see that the Civil War has more deaths than all the other wars combined, somewhere in the neighborhood of 620, 650,000. Some historians take it up even higher to 700,000 deaths. But that was at that time in U.S. history about 2% of the American population. So if we fought a war today that took 2% of the population, that would be 6 million lives today. So imagine how devastating that was for the country to have endured a conflict where 2% of the population perished in the war. That would be pretty devastating for any country. So as soldiers, if they were lucky enough to survive the war, they had memories of their experiences, of the things they went through, of death and destruction, and of the fellow soldiers that they served with. And a lot of these soldiers wrote memoirs afterwards. And in their memoirs, they told about their everyday experiences and fighting in battles. And we're going to look at a couple of those today. So the first one is actually from a Tennessee soldier. So this guy's name is Sam Watkins, and he was born in Columbia, Tennessee, which is over in Middle Tennessee. He enlisted when he was 21 years old in the 1st Tennessee Regiment and served from 1861 until the end of the war. So he was lucky enough to have served basically almost the entire time of the Civil War and then lived to tell about it. And Sam Watkins fought in some of the bloodiest battles in the Western theater of the war, places like Shiloh, Chickamauga, Atlanta, Franklin, Perryville, Kentucky. And after the war, he wrote a memoir of his experiences called Company H, the 1st Tennessee Regiment, or a sideshow of the Big Show. And historians really appreciate Sam Watkins' writing because he gives a first-person account of a soldier's experience and a rare look into the daily lives of Confederate soldiers like himself. So Sam Watkins is going to sort of give us the Confederate perspective of the everyday life of a soldier. And then we're also going to look at a guy named Elisha Hunt Rhodes, and he's going to give us the Union perspective. So Elisha Hunt Rhodes was born in Rhode Island. He enlisted in Company D of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers in 1861 and served for the entirety of the war, just like Sam Watkins. But Elisha Hunt Rhodes actually moved up in rank all the way from a private to a colonel by the end of the war. He also fought in really well-known battles in the Eastern Theater. So Elisha Hunt Rhodes was at the First Battle of Bull Run. He fought at Antietam and then also at Gettysburg. And he was present at Appomattox Courthouse when General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to General Grant. So Elisha Hunt Rhodes kept a diary throughout the war and then was published by a great grandson in 1885 as the Civil War Diary and Letters of Elisha Hunt Rhodes. And this gives us, again, a first-person view of the suffering and hardships and the attitudes of Elisha Hunt Rhodes and other Union soldiers in their experiences during the war. So if you would, in your packet of information that you have, if you will read those two excerpts from these two gentlemen, so the one from Sam Watkins and then the one from Elisha Hunt Rhodes. And then as you read those, think about these questions. So the first question being, what do these excerpts tell you about the realities of war? So think about how these two gentlemen and their experiences, are they similar? Are they different? Based on, number two, based on Rhodes' diary entries, why did he join the fighting? So think about why, with what Elisha Hunt Rhodes says, why did he join the Union Army and fight in the Civil War? And then third, Sam Watkins wrote his story nearly 20 years after the end of the war. Do you think that an account written directly after the events occurred would have been different? Why or why not? So as you read these two excerpts, think about these questions, and then when you finish, answer these 3 questions. And you can pause the video and then continue when you get finished. So that's going to conclude our study of the lives of Civil War soldiers. If you are interested in exploring more of this information, there's a few things that I would recommend to you. You can experience a virtual Civil War battle if that's something that would be interested to you in YouTube, if you just click on that link. You can also visit the Gettysburg National Military Park Visitors Center collection. They have an amazing collection of artifacts and things that you can look at and help yourself experience the lives of soldiers. And then the last thing would be the Andersonville Prison virtual tour. So Andersonville Prison was a prison for Union soldiers that was in Confederate Georgia, was the largest prison during the Civil War, and you can learn more about the experience of Civil War prisoners by taking a look at that virtual tour as well. So I thank you for tuning in today, and I hope that you've learned something about the lives of soldiers, and we look forward to having you back at the beginning of next year. Have a great summer.